Perfect. Well, thank you everyone for being here today. I'm Meghan. This is Nick. We're two PhD students at the University of Wisconsin. Roth, who's my advisor and Nick's mentor as well, is also on this project. I would say this project is a result of putting two critical cartographers, geographers in a UI UX course at the University of Wisconsin. So we're really trying to merge theory and practice in this project. And so the title of our talk is Humanizing Maps. And so we're in the social theory session, and so what we've been thinking through and kind of trying to work with is what is the relationship, or what can feminist theory offer cartography? And so in this broader intellectual project, how can we use feminist theory as a particular lens to kind of rethink conventions and rethink some of the strategies that we default to? And so some may think when I say feminist cartography or feminist data visualization, might think of something like this. But so we're not only looking at kind of this idea that feminist theory is this women's, it's not only about women. I think this is evocative because when you do visualize something like this, it has a different impact than just writing it out. But also, this is also very limited visualization when we think of, we're still using very binary relationships between gender identity and things like that. So when I'm thinking through and kind of pushing these ideas forward, I'm working with a broader context of what is feminist data visualization, what is feminist cartography, and what can we do with that. And so for the most part, we've been drawing off of Catherine D'ignazio's work. She also goes by Kanarinka. But she defines feminist data visualization as, I'm actually going to read this, the visual presentation of systematically collected information that intentionally and critically addresses questions of power, inequality, representation, and ethics. And so any visualization can be feminist in terms of its content, in terms of its data, but also in terms of form and representation, and then process. And so,
yeah. So so we're thinking of how social theory always comes to underlie what kind of world a map creates. And I think in the session we've seen various sorts of theories underlying how we're thinking of mapping. And thinking of this quote from Karen Broad, the nature of the observed phenomena changes with corresponding changes in the apparatus. And I want to think of the apparatus as being cartography as a project, but then also, as we'll see, the studies we do to understand how our maps are working, which is really the basis of this talk. And so, and Catherine D'ignazio has a bunch of different aspects that we might apply to thinking through cartography. And in this talk, we're thinking of just a few of them. So like Meghan mentioned, rethinking binaries through representations. So what other kind of representations are possible in mapping? Considering the context that our maps lie in. And thinking of embodiment and affect and how they come through and relate to a viewer between the map and the viewer.
Yeah, and so as I mentioned, this is an ongoing dissertation broad thing. So this is actually the first time we're kind of presenting some of these ideas. But all of these concepts directly relate to what we do every day. And so I really hope that this sparks conversation. And so as we move into what we ended up doing, the themes that Catherine D'ignazio and Lauren Klein provide, we started kind of picking those apart. How can we really address these topics? And so when we think about representations, and so we're mapping different people, and so how do we depict bodies in certain ways? And so we did stick with kind of our conventional default choices because these are very common choices for what we do use. And so in some ways we are rethinking representation, but we're also testing them. So how can we actually look at how these representations work and how do they work in particular ways? Sorry for the back and forth.
So another thing we tested is the context, and so representing data in various ways. So giving users a very kind of quantitative breakdown, categorical, versus putting that in context in sentences in a more narrative form. And also then trying to elicit feedback from people about their emotional responses to different sorts of mapping conventions. So here is a kind of an overview of a bunch of the the variables we tested, and this is going into a user study. So different types of representations. We had points, icons, choropleth, proportional symbols. We also switched the base map between a kind of satellite view and a very simplified view. We built this into 2 case studies to study this with users. So one is police killings in Oakland, California, which is pictured here, and the other one was people killed in Aleppo, Syria. So these are the 2 case studies we used, and what we did is we had this map task for people to go through and decide where they were going to put an emergency relief center for these issues, and you can see those numbered on the map. So we're trying to get people to do this task, and then later we'll kind of recall what they remember about the map in these different situations and different representations. So we used the MapStudy tool, which, no, Carl's not here? Okay. That has been built in the UW Cartography lab that allows people to put studies up to have a map next to a series of questions for users. And so we solicited 140 people on Mechanical Turk to test these various scenarios and then elicit feedback from them. And we also collected data on what they were clicking on, how are they panning, zooming, doing all these tasks as they were going through these various scenarios. And we wanted to give a shout out to Carl Sack. He's put the MapStudy on GitHub, so definitely come talk to us if you're interested in doing a similar sort of study. Oh, and so we have a bunch of kind of initial results from this study, and we're going to go through and think through what some of those are and what they might mean for thinking through how we make maps in various scenarios.
Yeah, and so we have these 3 map types that we're using. We have our 4 representations, but we wanted to kind of cue in what do each of these do really well, and so, or what do they do poorly. And so when we were thinking about the choropleth map, and we tested using a PANAS survey of kind of positive and negative affect, people that had the choropleth as their example map, they actually had higher negative scores. And so basically what that means is they felt less hostile, they felt less upset, they felt less ashamed or guilty, distressed, irritable. And so it's not necessarily saying they had a positive experience, but it was less negative. And so what this might suggest, and granted this is, we're still teasing out some of these results with qualitative data as well, is that this might suggest that there's a little bit of a distancing between the people in your map that are displayed in a choropleth and what you're trying to get them to view from that. And so maybe it's more distance, maybe it's a little sterile, maybe it's just because it looks more statistical, but people had they did not feel as negative about this one. In contrast, so this is the choropleth applied across both case studies, Oakland and then Aleppo on the right. And so we had the inverse relationship with icons. And so people they felt more hostile, or they felt more irritable or ashamed or upset or distressed by viewing icons. And so this might suggest that if we want to convey some sort of emotive experience of these people, going to icons or something that's a little more mimetic might be a useful choice. And so here again are the icons played across both case studies and both base map types.
And like I mentioned before, we tested both pop-ups that told a story, and then pop-ups who took that data and were very categorical and quantitative. And we found kind of mixed results. So the qualitative pop-ups, people clicked on less, and so they're kind of longer narrative form. But we're also able to recall demographic groups that were represented in those pop-ups more. So a lot of people pointed out that a lot of children were affected by this violence, right? So in the qualitative pop-ups, they're more likely to be able to recall that information. So sort of mixed results in how we understand this. And so here's an example of the quantitative versus the qualitative. So in a very categorical versus sentence.
Yeah, and so just in terms of other ways of engaging and interacting with the map, in general, the aggregated views of the proportional symbol and the or choropleth map, sorry, people tended to zoom more, and so there was a little more little more engagement through the zoom itself, and so it's not necessarily saying that they're zooming to a particular point or whatever, but there was increased engagement with the map because it was aggregated. Or in the aggregated groups. We also saw, as people were selecting different sites, each representation, for the most part, the first three on the left, people chose site 1 more regularly. But for some reason, with the choropleth map, people actually chose site 1 less frequently at, I would say, 50% less or something like that. And so these representations are not only affecting how people engage with the people in the map, but it's causing different types of decisions to be made based on the representation. And so I think this is a huge question as we move forward with decision-making tasks and things like that. What types of representations work best, or how can we improve the representations that we currently work with? So this is kind of the first cut at the data. Happy to talk more about this. We were also really interested in the qualitative information that came from our study as well. So there was some Likert scale type questions, but then also just a lot of form fill-in questions. And we were impressed that people actually took it seriously and gave us a lot of information to work with. And so we're still going through a content analysis with that. But here's some preliminary quotes, I guess.
And I think the qualitative feedback really shows how complicated this is and how we can't make kind of general statements about all map readers. So everyone has their situated context that they come into the map. So this was one of my favorite commenters who was very kind of angry at the study and saying, why am I supposed to even pretend to care about statistics? And there was a lot of cursing and stuff. But at the end, this person said, after the data changed from this very quantitative representation to the more qualitative, they said, I'm actually shocked it felt better than the first map, despite no data difference. So even recognizing that the data is the same, but put in sentence form, it was much more engaging for them.
Yeah, and so I think as people recognize that they did click on the map and that they did engage in that map and that it did elicit some sort of emotive response. And so this person, as I clicked on different people, it made my heart break and I feel sad and feel compassionate for these people. And so the map truly did help people engage more directly with the people in the map itself, which I think is something we do really need to be thinking about in static print mapping, of course, but also in interactive as we give people more data to explore and work with. What types of stories can we engage, and how do we get them to click on it and find those stories? Yeah.
And of course, there's always limits. We always bring our own experiences into the map. So, for instance, some people really engage with the maps because of their particular situated experience. So the people were relatable, considering I'm in that age group and I'm Black. Versus someone would say, this map is not relatable to me as I've never been anywhere close to this sort of situation. So very varied results in terms of how people actually interacted with it, or related to it, I should say.
And so we also asked, okay, how could we make this map more relatable to you? And one of the defaults was, I think pictures would be really helpful. And of course, pictures are so emotive and really generate that gut instinct or gut reaction that oftentimes we do see in news media. And then I think that people also suggested, more about the individual person, maybe more humanized attribute data about the family as opposed to gender or ethnicity or age group. So maybe what kind of nuanced attribute data might be more helpful. I think we can all understand how complicated adding pictures could be to something like this, and the biases that might also elicit, and then just privacy issues in general. But I would say at least, I don't know if we would say half, but a lot of them really wanted to see pictures because I felt like that was the next solution to really relating with the people in the map.
And so I think that brings up a question of people make these suggestions, and then future directions for this sort of study would be to see if that actually did change how people reacted to the map. And so just the end, I going back to this, very early critical cartography moments of J.B. Harley. So while the map is never the reality, in such a way it helps to create a different reality. I think we want to, this is like our initial suggestion that we start thinking about what kind of theories we put into this and what kind of reality we're creating through the maps we create. So thanks.
much.